name is Michael Guy. Um, the organizations I worked with were Options for about 20 years, Options News Magazine for about 20 years, and the Gay Lesbian Pride Committee, that's what we called it then, for about 5 years in the at the beginning of the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. I did some work with ACT UP as well. My spouse, Patrick Maha, was a dedicated member of ACT UP, and so I would also attend, the protests and the actions and things like that. Did a little bit of stuff with the Rhode Island Alliance for Gay and Lesbian Civil Rights. Just, would sort of show up when they needed people to show up at the State House and yell. And then also a really wonderful thing that I was involved with, that Patrick and I were involved with, were the gay boy and gay girl nutcrackers. And I don't have dates for those, but those are probably like mid to late 90s. I think there were maybe 5 or 6 of them. They were kind of variety shows that our friend Adam Bach, who was a member of ACT UP here in Rhode Island for a long time, had done. They had started with One Year for Pride, some people that organized a gay lesbian talent show at AS220 called Stravaganza. And Adam had written some skits for 4 guys who went as the House of Chanel. And they told their coming out stories. And one of them, I can't remember her name, but she was Chanel Paris. And her coming out story was that she finally, went to her family to tell her truth. She couldn't live a lie any longer, and she needed to let them know so that she could feel more fulfilled as a person and go on with her life. And so she went to her family and she said, "I have something to tell you. It may be hard to hear, but I'm beautiful." And so that was her coming out story as a model for the House of Chanel Paris. Anyway, so Adam decided, he and I worked at Trinity Rep together, and he said, well, why don't we have a gay Christmas carol or a gay nutcracker? What's the nutcracker all about? I don't know. So he got the music and he listened to it and decided to write a series of skits that the first couple of skits maybe had something to do with the nutcracker, and the subsequent skits had nothing to do with the nutcracker, only were about being gay, lesbian, transsexual, bisexual, queer during the holidays, and how difficult that is for people, and visiting family and stuff like that. So like I said, this was, around 1990, I think. And so the first show we did at School One, I don't know if it's still at corner of Hope Street and John Street, but they let us use their auditorium on the 3rd or 4th floor. And there were no chairs or anything like that. So we told people it's $3 and you have to bring your own chair or cushion to sit on. And we also told those guys from the Phoenix newspaper, the new paper, Philippe and Jorge, we said, we're doing this thing, can you put in your column? And so they did, and we had done a little advertising and expected maybe 100 of our friends to show up. Well, 300 people showed up for this thing. And Adam is a genius. He's a well-established playwright now, living in New York, but he's a genius at combining very heartfelt, emotional kinds of things with funny things. And particularly where it's like funny, 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 and then he does something just a little more serious and you go, oh my God. And so one of the, and I always get choked up telling this, even though it's so ridiculous. One of the things was we had this very big guy, Doug Reed. Doug Reed, he's a giant. He's huge and beautiful and wonderful. And he was the Sugar Plum Fairy. And he comes out in a fairy costume and he's huge, 6 foot something, and and he's dancing around, and he said, "I'm the Sugar Plum Fairy, and this is my music." And it was the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies by Tchaikovsky. And he's dancing around to it, and he goes, "It follows me everywhere I go." He goes, "When I go into the coffee exchange, it follows me there. When I go to the doctor's office, it's the music playing on the waiting room music. It follows me into the elevator. It's the music on the elevator." And he goes, "And it's wonderful music, but sometimes I get really tired of it, and I just want it to stop." And the music stops. And then he said, "But you know what? It's my music, and I've got to live with it." And then it comes back on, and he dances off. And excuse me, it just, it was hilarious until he says, "It's my music, and I have to dance to it." And it was like everybody in the audience knows what that means, They know, oh, excuse me. So silly. But they know we all have our own music that we have to dance to. And so anyway, the next year we did that at Alumni Hall at Brown. And 600 people came, and the next year 700 people came. It was gigantic, and it was really, really very wonderful. He had a number where a bunch of women came out in work boots and tool belts and danced to the Russian song. And that's the one that just gets faster and faster and faster and faster. And they started out by just like flirting with each other and smiling and winking and being a little bit butch, and stuff like that. And then ending up just running in place as fast as they could. And it was, likewise, it was another moment where it was very silly and funny, but an empowering moment where I don't think that lesbians always saw themselves on stage, or had not regularly seen themselves on stage, and not seen themselves in a positive way, and an empowered kind of way, and a fun way. And so it did that. Anyway, it was very fun to be a part of that. That's one of the things I'm really proud of doing in Rhode Island, is being part of the Gay Boy and Gay Girl Nutcrackers. That's it for me.